Well, let me move on to the second part of the topic that I'm supposed to comment on, and I will try to comment from my own personal experience on the various commissions that I have been involved in. So commissions of inquiry, what are they? What is their function? Well, let me say that the genesis of commissions of inquiry typically is man's inhumanity to man, or in some instances, man's inhumanity to women. For example, the Arbor inquiry, which Professor Montour is very, very familiar. In that instance, we looked at the attack on unarmed women, prisoners, who were disrobed and oppressed by male emergency response team members who were masked and fully garbed in tactical wear. This occurred in April of 1994 at the Prison for Women. And Madam Justice Louise Arbour, now recently of the United Nations Human Rights Tribunal, formerly of our Supreme Court of Canada, formerly of the Ontario Court of Appeal, heard that. Very recently, the Wright inquiry, that looked into the horrific and absolutely astounding acts of police services in this city in its treatment of an Aboriginal youth and subsequent treatment of his family in the attempts to, well, let's not put too fine a point on it, in an attempt to conceal their actions. And more recently, in the Ipperwash inquiry, where we have there in 1995 an attack on Aboriginal protesters who were attempting to assert a long-held and long-thought-of right to certain territories. And I'll try to talk about that a little bit more without getting myself into too much trouble. Public inquiries, or commissions of inquiry, are called by governments. They're often called reluctantly, although sometimes, well, like the Gomery inquiry, that is the inquiry that's currently looking into the sponsorship inquiry, what do they call that? Scandal, yes. And of course, the former government main players are now actively trying to stall that. So public inquiries are often called very reluctantly, but I can also assure you that sometimes they are called quite gleefully, as in some, where there's an opportunity to embarrass your political predecessors or perhaps those that may come after you. There are, of course, other reasons that public inquiries are called, but for Aboriginal people, I would submit respectfully that the main thing that it allows, particularly for Aboriginal people, especially where there has been no access to the courtroom, it allows a deeper look at the circumstances that have gone on in a particular instance. And it happens in the context of more relaxed rules. In public inquiries, there are not the same rules applied. There are rules of practice and procedure that are created by the inquiry itself. There's an ability to admit evidence that would not otherwise be admitted. And so it does allow a closer examination of the circumstances. And whether or not at the end of the day that allows truth to shine through, well, I don't know, but there's a version of truth that certainly comes through, as we have seen in Mr. Justice Wright's report into the findings of the inquiry into the death of Neil Stonechild. I think I do have a appointment with my optometrist later, so the next time you see me, I'll have these nice glasses where I won't be taking them off. I don't know why I said that either, but the second thing that it does is that it brings the issues to the front burner. It brings the issues that are faced by Aboriginal people to the forefront. It creates a circumstance where conversation can occur, argument, where dialogue can occur, where an exchange of ideas can occur. Because it seems to me that unless we had individuals like Stella Bignell, Darrell Knight, and others who have come forward with their courageous stories, it's pretty unlikely we'd be having this conversation today. Maybe I'm wrong. So without public inquiries that look into the details of these issues, who would have known about Sandra Paquet-Chan and Joey Twin and those other women who were stripped of their clothing and pressed to the floor under plexiglass shields by male goon squad members? Who would have known of that indignity and the humiliation that they faced as they were locked into their cells in solitary confinement with no clothing for the days and weeks following that? Nobody would have known. It would have gone unnoticed. It would have gone uncommented upon, and we would have carried on. Who would have heard of Dudley George? Delio Pikachu, as some of you may or may not know, was instrumental in ensuring that issue even had remained alive to begin with, because she had taken the step of investigating this on her own accord, obviously under instructions from the client, but I mean on her own nickel, I should say. And having done so just under the wire and filed her statement of claim, managed to keep the whole issue alive. And had it not been for that, and of course the efforts of many who have got that inquiry underway, who would have known of the historical grievance of the Stony Point people who had their land seized from them under the War Measures Act in 1942 with a vague promise that it someday would be returned? Who would have known of the frustrations that this community had faced as they were dislocated and scattered across the country without a home, unwanted in the community that they were unceremoniously deposited in? Nobody would have known. Who would have remembered the late Neil Stonechild? Had we all not gone through the extraordinary and extremely painful exercise of the right inquiry into the circumstances of his death and the subsequent investigation of that? Not many people. There's another thing that is crucial about commissions of inquiry, I would suggest, and that is that they require champions. They require champions to press the issue, champions to fight, champions to push the envelope and the system in spite of the often overwhelming odds and significant resistance that those people will and do face. And again, had it not been for such champions as Stella Bignell, we would not be having this conversation today. This woman, undeterred and relentless in her quest to find out, to get some measure of justice for her child, you have no idea of the resistance that she had faced, of the blatant lies that were told to her, of the humiliation and indignity that she was forced to endure for a very important issue to her, and obviously an important issue to all of us. And what was she driven by? Love for her child? Perhaps. Undoubtedly. I said the other evening, as I had a moment to reflect on this, that it seems to me that in very many of these instances, it is the women of our communities that have driven these issues. I'm pleased to say that. I'm absolutely happy to say that and to acknowledge that. Because I think that as men, particularly as First Nations men, we have too easily grabbed the idea, the notion of the patriarchal society where the man is the boss and so on and so on. We've screwed it up, guys. And I think it's about time that we acknowledge that we have partners in this quest to move forward, and that perhaps have something very important to offer us in terms of justice, in terms of how we deal with our families, and what's important, what principles should we be looking toward? I said, and I repeat, that we owe to our mothers, our grandmothers, our aunts, our sisters, a huge debt of gratitude for the leadership that they've demonstrated. Absolutely huge debt of gratitude. Stella Bignell has, for me, shown me a new model, one of grace and dignity in advancing an issue. No more harsh words and hateful thoughts that are divisive and alienate those who would otherwise support us as First Nations and Métis people in our quest to have some measure of justice. I think it's time that we look toward this and to begin to approach these issues with the kind of love and compassion they've demonstrated for us. Mary Wagner, many others that will go unanswered. Mary Ellen again spoke to us about the importance of those many, many individuals who toil tirelessly and often thanklessly in the justice system. They may not be legally trained, or they may have other kinds of training, but they certainly work within the justice system, and they're incredibly important. See many of them here, Fred Campbell, Mr. Bird, and others. We heard yesterday from a speaker, Daryl Angus, I see him at the back there, who's an Aboriginal justice worker in his community, who spoke to us about the modest budget that he's forced to survive on. Who thanks him for his work and the work that's done in those communities? I think we need to. I think we need to acknowledge all of these people, and part of this conference, I think Paul does that. And again, I'm grateful to you for putting this on. To Mike Liberty, Sid Bitternose, to those other people that are working in the justice system, very little thanks and a lot of grief. I know that because I have a chance to visit with them and see what they face. Let's expand the definition of legal warrior. Let's expand it to, I don't know, justice warrior, something like that. Warriors, as we know in our communities, are not, we often associate that, or I can assure you that there are some who associate the thought of warriors with the militants, people who have AK-47s and are prepared to shoot their way out of a tight spot. But that isn't the traditional definition. As a matter of fact, warriors are peacekeepers, and that their job is to pick up the responsibility, the onerous responsibility of caring for our communities. That's who these people are. Let's expand that definition. And I can tell you that I am committed to working with those people, with all of you, with people of goodwill and of common intention to build the communities that we expect our children to inherit. I know I do. Let's acknowledge the fearless people in our midst that face every day the very daunting and seemingly impossible task that we've heard about, the enormous dysfunction, the drug addiction, and now the gangs that we are faced with, the crystal meth addiction in this city. There are too many horror stories, but these people face that on a daily basis, and how you do it, I cannot imagine, and I cannot thank you enough for that. But let's, together, begin to turn our minds to those issues, to reflect upon the various things and the various ideas that have come forward out of this conference, and continue to work together. I want to just conclude. The other evening, I had quoted Dr. Martin Luther King, who had said, "It's not the hateful words of my enemies that I fear, but rather the silence of my friend." After saying that, I was approached by a young lady who reminded me that he also said something else, and that is that we begin dying the moment we stop talking about the issues. So I want to thank you for your kind attention, and let's live. Thank you.